There is a certain kind of story that pulls us in, not with violence or gore, but with sheer, unadulterated audacity. It's the story of the impossible feat, the brazen challenge to a system that's designed to be unbeatable. We're not talking about crimes of passion or brutal acts of violence. We're talking about crimes of intellect, of planning, of nerve. These are the stories of the great heists. There's a reason we're so fascinated by them. In a world of rules and consequences, a perfectly executed heist feels like a glitch in the matrix. It's a momentary suspension of reality, where someone or a group of someones looks at an impenetrable fortress at a bank vault, a moving airplane, or a hallowed museum and says, "I can break that." They are the modern-day tricksters, the architects of the perfect crime. And when they succeed, when they take the prize and melt away into the background of society without a trace, they become something more than criminals. They become legends, ghosts, phantoms in the annals of criminal history. Tonight, we are chasing those ghosts. We are delving into 3 of the most baffling, audacious, and legendary unsolved heists of all time. These are the cases that have stumped investigators for decades. Cases where the culprits and their incredible loot have vanished as if they were never there at all. They left behind a trail of questions, a handful of clues, and a legacy of pure, uncut mystery. First, we'll take to the stormy skies of the Pacific Northwest, where we'll meet a quiet man in a business suit who committed a crime so bold, so cinematic, it turned him into an American folk hero. A man known to the world only by the name the media gave him, D.B. Cooper. Then, we'll walk the hallowed, silent halls of a Boston museum, where 2 men dressed as police officers pulled off the single largest property theft in history, an art theft of such magnitude that its loss is still felt every single day. And finally, we'll travel south to Brazil, to uncover a heist of such incredible engineering and brute force genius that it sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood blockbuster. These are stories of incredible risk and unimaginable reward. But more than that, they are puzzles. Puzzles with missing pieces that may be lost forever. So find a comfortable spot, settle in, and prepare to question everything you think you know about security, anonymity, and the art of getting away with it. Because tonight, we're celebrating the ones who got away. Our first story begins where many stories do, on an airplane. But this was no ordinary flight. It was November 24th, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve. A time for family, food, and travel. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 was making its short, routine hop from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. The plane, a Boeing 727, was about a third full. The mood was mundane, unremarkable. Among the passengers was a man in his mid-40s, sitting in seat 18C. He was wearing a dark business suit, a white collared shirt, and a black necktie. He looked like any other traveling businessman. He ordered a bourbon and soda. He was polite. He was quiet. He had purchased his one-way ticket under the name Dan Cooper. Shortly after takeoff, this quiet man handed a note to a flight attendant named Florence Schaffner. Like most flight attendants in that era, she was used to lonely businessmen passing her their phone numbers, so she simply slipped the note into her pocket, unopened. The man leaned closer. "Miss," he said, his voice calm and low, "you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Florence retrieved the note. The words, written in neat, all-caps felt pen, were chillingly direct. He confirmed he had a bomb in his briefcase, and he wanted her to sit with him. She did, and he briefly opened the briefcase to show her what looked like a mess of wires and 8 red cylinders. The threat was real. Dan Cooper, who would later be misidentified by a reporter as D.B. Cooper, a name that would stick forever, was now in control of the plane. His demands were specific, and surprisingly reasonable for a man holding an entire plane hostage. He wanted $200,000 in negotiable American currency. That's about $1.3 million today. He wanted 4 parachutes, 2 primary and 2 reserve. And he wanted a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane upon arrival. The choice of 4 parachutes has been a source of endless debate. Was it to suggest he had an accomplice? Was it to ensure the authorities didn't give him sabotaged equipment, assuming he'd make a hostage jump with him? Or did he simply not know that a reserve chute was part of a standard parachute rig? It was the first of many enigmatic details in a crime defined by them. While the plane circled Puget Sound, the FBI and airline officials scrambled to meet his demands on the ground. They gathered the money, 10,000 unmarked $20 bills. A crucial detail is that they decided to photograph every single bill, creating a microfilm record of the serial numbers. They procured the parachutes from a local skydiving school. For 2 hours, as the sun set, Cooper remained perfectly calm aboard the plane. He ordered a second bourbon and soda, paid for it, and even tried to give the flight attendant the change. He was, by all accounts, a gentleman hijacker. He was never cruel, never agitated. He was in complete control of himself and the situation. When the plane landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, Cooper had the blinds drawn to prevent police snipers from getting a view. The exchange was made. The money and parachutes were brought aboard by an airline employee. In return, Cooper released all 36 passengers and 2 of the flight attendants. He kept the pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, and 1 attendant on board. He was holding up his end of the bargain. But he wasn't done. Now, he issued his final set of instructions. He wanted the plane to fly towards Mexico City, but at a specific, very unusual low altitude under 10,000 feet and at a slow airspeed of under 200 knots. This was just above the plane's stall speed, as slow as a 727 could possibly fly. He also demanded that the landing gear remain down and the wing flaps be lowered to 15 degrees. The pilots protested, saying that flying to Mexico City under those conditions was impossible with their current fuel. Cooper, showing a surprising knowledge of the aircraft's capabilities, was pragmatic. They agreed on a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. Sometime after 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 was back in the air. The small crew was sequestered in the cockpit. Cooper was alone in the dark passenger cabin. The only person who saw him last was flight attendant Tina Mucklow, whom he instructed to go into the cockpit and not come out. The last she saw of him, he was tying something, possibly the money bag, around his waist. Around 8 p.m., a warning light flashed in the cockpit, indicating that the aft air stair retractable staircase at the tail of a 727 had been activated. Through the cockpit intercom, the pilot asked Cooper if he needed any assistance. Cooper's final, simple reply came back, "No." That was the last anyone ever heard from Dan Cooper. At approximately 8:13 p.m., somewhere between Seattle and Reno, over the rugged, heavily forested, and sparsely populated wilderness of southwestern Washington, the plane's tail section experienced a sudden upward movement. The crew felt a change in air pressure. D.B. Cooper, clutching his briefcase and $200,000, had lowered the aft stairs and leaped from a commercial airliner into a freezing, rain-swept night at an altitude of 10,000 feet. He jumped into darkness. He jumped into legend. When the plane landed safely in Reno, the authorities swarmed it. All they found was Cooper's black clip-on tie, 2 of the 4 parachutes he'd requested, and the stub of a cigarette. An unprecedented manhunt began. The FBI, along with the military, conducted one of the most extensive and expensive searches in U.S. history. They scoured the projected jump zone, a vast and treacherous wilderness. They found nothing. No parachute, no briefcase, no body, no trace of D.B. Cooper. He had vanished. For years, the case remained utterly cold. It was the perfect crime, an unsolved heist carried out in midair. The FBI followed thousands of leads and investigated over 800 suspects, but could never definitively identify the man who called himself Dan Cooper. Then, in 1980, 9 years after the jump, a small piece of the puzzle surfaced. An 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was vacationing with his family along the Columbia River at a place called Tena Bar. While digging in the sand, he uncovered 3 packets of rotting cash. The bills were disintegrated, but the FBI was able to confirm from the serial numbers that this was, without a doubt, a portion of Cooper's ransom money, around $5,800 of it. But this discovery only deepened the mystery. The money was found far from the primary search zones. How did it get there? Did Cooper land nearby and lose some of the cash? Did he bury it and it was later washed downstream? Or did it somehow fall from the sky and land there on its own? The discovery proved that Cooper and the money left the plane, but it told them nothing about his fate. And it was the last, and only piece of physical evidence from the crime ever recovered in the wild. The theories are endless. One school of thought says he died in the attempt. An inexperienced skydiver jumping at night, in a storm, into a dense forest, with improper clothing, is a recipe for disaster. He likely would have been killed on impact or died of exposure. His body and the remaining money were simply swallowed by the vast wilderness. Another school of thought believes he survived. He was calm, knowledgeable, and seemed to know exactly what he was doing. Proponents of this theory believe he was an experienced paratrooper, perhaps a disgruntled veteran, who had a plan, an accomplice on the ground, and who successfully made his getaway, living out the rest of his life in quiet anonymity. Over the years, several compelling suspects have emerged. There was Richard McCoy Jr., a Vietnam veteran who pulled off a nearly identical copycat hijacking just 5 months later. He was caught, but he always denied being Cooper, and the physical descriptions didn't quite match. There was Dwayne Weber, a career criminal who made a deathbed confession to his wife, saying, "I'm Dan Cooper," but his DNA didn't match the partial profile the FBI later developed from Cooper's tie. The list goes on and on, each suspect a tantalizing but ultimately unprovable possibility. In 2016, the FBI officially closed the active investigation into the D.B. Cooper case after 45 years. He remains the only unsolved case of air piracy in commercial aviation history. He is a ghost, a folk hero, a symbol of defiance against the system. He's the man who gambled everything on a single leap of faith and, whether he lived or died, he won his place in immortality. From the wild, open sky, we now move to the hushed and cloistered world of fine art. Our next story is not about a daredevil, but about ghosts of a different kind. Silent, methodical phantoms who walked into a palace of culture and walked out with a king's ransom, committing the most devastating art theft in modern history. Our setting is Boston, Massachusetts. The date is March 18, 1990. It was the early hours of the morning after St. Patrick's Day. The city was sleeping off a night of celebration. On the edge of the Fenway, a beautiful Venetian-style palace houses one of the most unique and personal art collections in the world, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. The museum was the life's work of its eccentric and brilliant founder, who stipulated in her will that the collection must be maintained exactly as she left it. Nothing could be added, moved, or sold. It was a perfect time capsule of art and beauty. At 1:24 a.m., a red buzzer shattered the silence of the museum's security office. 2 police officers were at a side door, asking to be let in. They told the 23-year-old security guard on duty, Rick Abath, that they were responding to a disturbance call. This was the first critical mistake. Letting anyone in, even police, without first verifying with their superiors, was a direct violation of protocol. But they were police officers. They looked the part, so Abath let them in. Once inside, one of the officers told Abath that he looked familiar, that they might have a warrant out for his arrest, and asked him to step away from the security desk and its all-important panic button. Abath complied. He was then quickly handcuffed, as was the second guard on duty. The thieves' ruse was perfect. They told the guards, "This is a robbery. There was no gunfire, no overt violence. Just calm, chilling authority." The 2 guards were led to the museum's basement, bound with duct tape to pipes, and left in the dark. The thieves now had the entire museum to themselves. They were unhurried, methodical. They spent an astonishing 81 minutes inside. They didn't just smash and grab. They moved with purpose. Their first stop was the Dutch Room, a treasure trove of Golden Age masterpieces. There, they committed their most infamous acts of vandalism. They took Rembrandt's only known seascape, The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, and another of his masterpieces, A Lady and Gentleman in Black. They didn't bother to remove the canvases carefully. They crudely cut them from their frames with a blade. They also stole a priceless and incredibly rare painting by Johannes Vermeer, The Concert. There are only about 36 known Vermeer paintings in the world, and this was one of them. Its loss was immeasurable. They also took a small Rembrandt self-portrait etching and a work by Govert Flinck. Their choices, however, were bizarre. In the same room, they left a far more valuable Rembrandt self-portrait hanging untouched. Their movements through the museum were equally perplexing. They went to the short gallery on the other side of the building and took 5 Degas drawings and a bronze eagle finial from the top of a Napoleonic flag. They tried to unscrew the flagpole but failed, so they just took the finial. In another gallery, they stole a delicate, ancient Chinese bronze beaker, or gu, from the Shang dynasty. It was valuable, yes, but not nearly as valuable as other items they walked right past. And most strangely, they went into the Blue Room and took Manet's Chez Tortoni, but ignored other, more famous paintings in the same room. They seemed to be following a specific, yet oddly curated, shopping list. The way they cut the canvases from the frames suggested a lack of sophistication, the work of common thugs. But their knowledge of which rooms to hit, and their choice of some obscure but valuable pieces, suggested some degree of inside knowledge or a specific buyer's request. Were they expert thieves or bumbling amateurs who got lucky? This contradiction is at the heart of the mystery. At 2:45 a.m., they made their final trip to the basement to check on the guards, then walked out the same side door they came in, carrying 13 priceless works of art, valued at the time at $200 million. Today, that value is estimated to be well over $500 million. They loaded their haul into a car and disappeared into the Boston night. The next shift of guards arrived in the morning to find the museum seemingly empty. When they finally discovered their colleagues in the basement and raised the alarm, the scale of the devastation became clear. The Boston police and the FBI descended on the scene. But the thieves had been careful. They had taken the security videotape from the night of the heist. They left behind no fingerprints, no hair, no useful forensic evidence. They were ghosts. The investigation has been a sprawling, frustrating epic that has lasted for more than 3 decades. Theories have swirled, pointing in every direction. One of the most prominent theories connects the heist to the Boston Mafia. Local mob boss Whitey Bulger was an early suspect, but he reportedly told informants he had nothing to do with it, as art theft wasn't his style. The focus then shifted to a lower-level crew associated with a mobster named Carmelo Merlino. The FBI believes that two known associates, George Reisfelder and Lenny DiMuzio, may have been the men who entered the museum, but both men died within a year of the heist. Another key figure was Robert "Bobby" Guarente, a mob associate who allegedly came into possession of the paintings. His wife told the FBI that after his death, he had given the stolen art to another aging gangster, Robert the Cook Gentile. Gentile's home was raided, but despite finding a handwritten list of the stolen artworks and their estimated black market value, no paintings were found. Gentile has maintained, through years of pressure and imprisonment on other charges, that he knows nothing. Another theory suggests the art was stolen for the IRA, or that it was taken by a master international art thief like the legendary Miles Connor Jr., though he was in prison at the time of the heist. The museum, in a poignant and defiant act of hope, has left the empty frames of the stolen paintings hanging on the walls. They are ghostly placeholders, a constant, silent reminder of the profound cultural loss. The museum has offered a $10 million reward for information leading directly to the recovery of the art. No questions asked. It is the largest private reward ever offered for stolen property. Yet, in 30 years, not a single one of the 13 stolen pieces has surfaced. Not on the black market, not in a private collection. It's as if they were swallowed by the earth. This remains one of the most compelling unsolved heists because the prize wasn't just money. It was a piece of our shared cultural soul. The thieves didn't just steal paintings. They stole history, beauty, and genius. We don't know who they were, where they went, or what they did with their priceless loot. But every day, those empty frames hang in the Gardner Museum, asking the same silent question. Where is the art? Our final heist takes us into the modern era, a story not of a lone wolf or a pair of con artists, but of a large, highly organized, and brilliantly creative team of criminals. This is a story of engineering, patience, and a tunnel to a fortune. It's a heist so audacious it sounds like a movie script, and it remains one of the largest and most mysterious bank robberies of all time. We are in Fortaleza, a bustling coastal city in northeastern Brazil. The year is 2005. In the center of the city sits a branch of Brazil's Banco Central. Like any central bank, its vault was a fortress, thought to be impenetrable. It was equipped with motion sensors, cameras, and alarms, and its walls were constructed of over 3.5 feet of steel-reinforced concrete. About 3 months before the heist, in May, a group of men rented a commercial property just a block away from the bank. They set up a fake business, a company that sold artificial turf and plants. It was the perfect cover. It explained the constant presence of men coming and going, and it explained the large amounts of soil and rock they were constantly hauling away in vans. The neighbors just assumed it was part of the business. But they weren't selling grass. They were digging. For 3 months, a crew of somewhere between 20 and 30 men worked around the clock in shifts. They dug a tunnel, 256 feet long, starting from their rented house and ending directly beneath the bank's vault. This was no crude hole in the ground. It was a masterpiece of amateur engineering. It was about 2.5 feet square, dug nearly 13 feet beneath the surface to avoid any underground pipes or cables. It was lined with wood paneling and plastic sheeting to prevent cave-ins. It even had its own electric lighting and a sophisticated air conditioning and circulation system. The men had thought of everything. Over the weekend of August 6th and 7th, 2005, they made their move. They used diamond-tipped power tools to drill up through the thick, steel-reinforced floor of the vault. They successfully bypassed all the electronic sensors. The alarms never went off. Once inside, they didn't have to deal with tellers or guards. They had direct access to the prize. Stacks and stacks of used 50 real notes. The money had been taken out of circulation and was waiting to be either incinerated or recirculated. Crucially, this meant the notes were old, unmarked, and untraceable. The gang spent the weekend inside the vault, meticulously opening 5 large containers of cash. They hauled an estimated 3.5 tons of money back through their tunnel. The total haul was staggering, 164.7 million Brazilian reais. At the time, that was equivalent to about $71.6 million US dollars. It was one of the biggest cash heists in world history. On Monday morning, bank employees arrived to work and opened the vault. They were met with a scene of utter disbelief. A massive, gaping hole in the floor, discarded tools, and empty cash containers. The fake landscaping company next door had been abandoned. The house was filled with the dirt they had excavated. The gang had a 2-day head start. They had committed a nearly perfect crime and vanished. But this is where our story takes a darker, more complicated turn than the others. The Brazilian police launched a massive investigation, and unlike the Cooper and Gardner cases, they started getting results. They began to catch some of the lower-level members of the gang, the muscle who helped dig the tunnel. And as they made arrests, a new, more sinister mystery began to unfold. One of the suspected leaders, a man named Luis Fernando Ribeiro, was found dead on a remote road outside Rio de Janeiro. He had been kidnapped and held for ransom by a group of corrupt police officers. His family paid over $800,000 for his release, but he was killed anyway. This was just the beginning. A wave of kidnappings, extortions, and murders swept through the members of the gang who had escaped with the cash. It seemed that the very money they had stolen had put a target on their backs. Criminals were hunting criminals. The heist had a curse. Over the next few years, police arrested several more individuals connected to the crime and recovered a small fraction of the money, maybe 20 million reais. But the true masterminds, the brains behind the operation, were never identified. Who had the architectural knowledge to map the vault's exact location? Who had the logistical genius to organize a 3-month-long digging operation in the middle of a city without being detected? Who financed the entire operation? These questions remain unanswered. The Banco Central burglary is a different kind of unsolved heist. It's not about a mysterious individual or a priceless cultural artifact. It's about the raw, brutal efficiency of a professional criminal organization. They displayed the patience of engineers, the precision of surgeons, and the ruthlessness of gangsters. While some paid the price, the architects of the plan and the vast majority of the incredible fortune they stole were never found. They tunneled their way into criminal history and then disappeared, leaving a trail of blood, money, and unanswered questions in their wake. So there we have them. 3 legendary heists. 3 stories of incredible audacity. A man who jumped from a plane into history, a pair of phantoms who stole $500 million in art, and a team of engineers who tunneled their way to a fortune. D.B. Cooper, the Gardner Museum thieves, the Fortaleza Tunnel Gang. They all sought the perfect crime, and by most measures, they achieved it. What is it about these unsolved heists that captures our imagination so fiercely? Perhaps it's a form of admiration. Not for the crime itself, but for the skill, the nerve, the sheer intelligence it took to pull it off. In a world that often feels chaotic and random, there's a strange satisfaction in seeing a plan so perfectly conceived and executed. These stories are the ultimate puzzles, and we are drawn to puzzles we cannot solve. They also represent a kind of fantasy, the fantasy of beating the system, of getting away with it. D.B. Cooper wasn't just a hijacker. He became a folk hero to some, a symbol of the little guy striking back at big corporations and the government. The Gardner thieves and the Fortaleza gang, while more anonymous, represent a fantasy of competence and control, of bending the world to their will through sheer ingenuity. But it's important to remember the reality behind the legend. These were not victimless crimes. The crew of Flight 305 and its passengers were terrorized. The guards at the Gardner Museum were tied up and left in a basement for hours, an experience that haunted them for the rest of their lives. And the community lost access to irreplaceable works of art. The aftermath of the Banco Central heist was a brutal bloodbath of greed and violence. The perfect crime is never truly perfect. There is always a cost. And yet, the mysteries endure. Did Cooper survive the jump? Is the Gardner art hanging in the secret collection of a billionaire? Or is it rotting in an abandoned warehouse somewhere? Who were the brilliant masterminds who engineered the Fortaleza tunnel? These are the questions they left us with, their final, lasting act of defiance. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these 3 unsolved heists fascinates you the most? Do you have a favorite theory about D.B. Cooper's fate? A gut feeling about where the stolen art from the Gardner Museum might be? Drop your thoughts, your theories, and your questions in the comments below. The investigation may be cold, but the conversation is always alive. And if you enjoy plumbing the depths of these enduring mysteries, and you believe that some stories deserve to be told and retold, consider subscribing and enabling notifications so you don't miss our next journey into the unknown. In the end, these stories serve as a powerful reminder. They show us that the systems we build to protect ourselves and our treasures are never foolproof. That human ingenuity, for better or for worse, can always find a crack in the wall. And that sometimes the most compelling characters are the ones who write their own incredible story, and then have the discipline to never write the final chapter. Thank you for listening. Stay curious and never stop questioning.